Hello all, welcome to lecture 8 of our market structure lecture series. In this lecture, we are going to look at part 3 of your lecture notes, so please turn to page 3. Before we start on part 3, let's do a quick recap or overview of what we have learned so far. So we began the topic by looking at the features of different markets across 4 types of markets, right? For every type, we look at number of firms, nature of the product, knowledge, degree of knowledge, and also barriers to entry, which determine the freedom of entry and exit. And then after we learn the characteristics, we look at how these characteristics can affect the behavior of firms in each market, right? There are 2 broad aspects of behavior: the pricing and output behavior or decisions, and also the price and non-price competition behavior of firms, right? What kind of strategies that they exhibit? Do they use pricing or do they tend to use non-price strategies? Okay, so finally, we now can move on to another query that we're trying to answer for market structure, which is, given the behavior of firms across different markets, to what extent do you think these behavior are desirable, right? So we're evaluating the performance of firms. And when we evaluate things, we need to use criteria, right? So when we evaluate performance of firms, we actually use 3 broad criteria, which is efficiency, equity, and consumer choice. So the essential question that we will be trying to answer in this lecture and the next lecture is actually, to what extent are firms desirable based on efficiency, equity, and the availability of consumer choice. So today's objective is for us to understand the meaning of various criteria for evaluating performance, and also there are conditions that need to be met, right? Definition and condition required to meet a given criteria so that we can assess correctly if a given market, is it the firms in that market, are they desirable in terms of this particular criteria. And after we learn the various criteria, we're going to use them to evaluate the desirability of PC firms in this lecture first, and then monopoly in the next lecture. And after we learn the evaluation of both markets, we'll stop and do revision to prepare for promo, right? So we do not need to, you do not need to know how to evaluate oligopoly and MC firms, okay? So in this particular section, I'll actually only talk about the efficiency criteria for PC firms for this section, but the lecture will cover every criteria. So the essential question that you should have in your mind as you listen to this lecture is, to what extent are PC firms desirable based on efficiency, equity, and consumer choice? Okay, so before we start, I'd like you to think about this quote or this sentence. It pretty much summarizes everything that we're doing in this topic of market structure, right? How firms are organized in different markets will affect the way they compete, which may or may not be desirable and therefore may require government intervention. We have learned government intervention under market failure, right? Where there are sources of market failure that cause allocation of resources to be inefficient, right? There is is either over or under consumed, or over or under produced, right? Actually, after you learned the evaluation of firms in this topic, you will see the linkage that actually firms in the production decisions that they make in terms of output level to choose, they can be overproducing or underproducing, which may give rise to a reason which warrants a government intervention, right? Because their output decision may be undesirable. Okay, so that's a link between this topic and market failure. Now let's go back to the quote. So the first part actually talk about organization of firms, right? And how do we determine which market structure or how is the firm organized, or how are firms organized in a particular market is based on the characteristics, right? So we always look at these 4 aspects of the characteristics. And then the second part about affecting the way firms compete is actually talking about a particular behavior, competition behavior of firms, right? Actually, the behavior is not just limited to how they compete, but also price and output behavior. Okay, and so we study theories that make predictions about how firms compete, right? And these predictions may not always hold true. And is another question that we're trying to answer when we study market structure is, well, I study some set of theories about that say that firms compete in a certain way, but I want to explore are these theories observed in reality? Do firms follow this theory in reality? And how do firms actually compete in real life? Okay, then based on this behavior, I can say something about the desirability of firms, right, using a few set of criteria. And based on my judgment, if, or not my judgment, but conventional economist judgment, if a given market is not desirable, then it will warrant government intervention, right? So actually the market failure topic kind of follow this section on evaluation of firms, because under market failure we'll learn that um, government can intervene with several policies, right? So those policies are not the focus of this particular section. We're actually just learning how firms can be desirable or undesirable based on given criteria. Okay, so let's look at the criteria in detail. So just now we said that there are three broad criteria: efficiency, equity, and consumer choice. And for the efficiency concept, we can further unpack it into different efficiency concepts of productive efficiency, allocative efficiency, and dynamic efficiency. Okay, we explain them, each of them in detail one by one. So let's first look at productive efficiency. Okay, so it is defined as, or rather it concerns the way firms produce, the production technique, okay, or how firms produce their goods and services, right? So they should be producing at a particular output using methods which lower their cost of production. So how do we know a firm is productive efficient? It is when the output is produced at the lowest possible average cost. Okay, the lowest possible average cost. So what are the conditions necessary for firms to achieve productive efficiency? Well, from the firm's point of view, they should be producing on the LRAC, or the long run average cost curve. Why do we say that? Because if you recall the long run average cost, it is obtained by actually summation of, or rather connecting of, all the lowest possible points on a short run average cost curve, right? So if you look at all the SRAC curves of a firm, the long run average cost curve will be the minimum point of each SRAC, and you connect them, you'll get LRAC. In other words, the LRAC curve actually represent the minimum possible cost that a firm can possibly incur if they want to produce at a particular output. Okay, so if the firm produces along any point on the LRAC curve, then the firm is said to be productive efficient from the firm's point of view, because the firm is already using a certain technique or production methods that lower its cost of production to the minimum possible that can be attained by the firm given that output level, right? Given that output level. Okay. However, from the society's point of view, not every point on the LRAC curve is productive efficient from the society's point of view, because we can see that there is a minimum point for the LRAC curve, right, which is the minimum efficient scale. So there is one quantity or one particular output Q3 which will give the firm the minimum possible cost of production, right? And this has something to do with the scale of the firm's production. So, or rather, how much the firm should produce at, right, in order to minimize its average cost of production. So there's only one point or output which is productive efficient, and that is the MES, the minimum efficient scale. Okay, so there are two ways to look at productive efficiency from the firm's point of view and the society's point of view. From the firm's point of view, is more about using the least costly method or the right production technique so that you minimize the production cost. But from the society's point of view, it's more about the scale of production. You should produce at a one single or a particular scale, a particular output that will minimize your cost of production. Okay? And whether the firm is productive efficient or not will have an impact on the price it's able to charge, because if the firm can keep the cost low, then it's able to charge a lower price in general. Okay, so let's look at the concept of productive efficiency in greater detail using this diagram. So we know that Q, the output of Q is productive efficient from the firm's point of view because it is a point on an LIAC curve. That means that at output Q, the firm's least possible cost of production is given by C, right? At this output Q, it is given by C. So it is productive efficient, okay, if the firm is producing at this particular point. However, if the firm can increase its scale of production to Q prime instead of Q, okay, then it can reap economies of scale and further reduce its cost of production, right? So to the society, Q prime is actually the point or the only point of output level that will meet the productive efficiency criteria, okay, from the society's point of view. However, we assume that in this section, we assume that firms aim to profit maximize, right? And hence, they may not produce at Q prime if Q prime is not the profit maximizing output. Okay, we cannot tell from this diagram because there's no MR and MC curve which are necessary for us to determine which output is the profit maximizing output, right? But just to understand that the firm may not be productive efficient from the society's point of view because the firm may not be producing at Q prime, right? Because it could be producing at a profit maximizing output level which is not Q prime. It could be Q, for example. Okay? And if the firm is not producing at Q prime, so not productive efficient from the society's point of view, then you can say that the firm is having excess capacity, and we'll explore this concept further when we evaluate imperfect competition firms. Okay, now let's answer the question, are PC firms desirable in terms of productive efficiency? Okay, so we know that these are the two criteria. It has to produce on the LIC curve, and if it is, we say that it is productive efficient from the society's point of view, then it has to produce at a minimum point of the LIC curve. So let's draw out the LIC curve of the PC firm. And we know that this diagram illustrates the long-run equilibrium of all PC firms, right? It is the only equilibrium that they can be at in the long run because we know that they can only make normal profit in the long run at output Q, which is profit maximizing for the PC firm. It is where MC equals to MR at Q, right? It will produce at Q. The firm will charge a price of P, and where is the firm at in terms of LIAC? Well, the firm will be producing at the minimum point of the LIAC curve, isn't it? Okay, so we can say that PC firms in general are productive efficient from the firm's point of view and the society's point of view. Okay, next, let's go to allocative efficiency. The definition of allocative efficiency is that resources are allocated in such a way that society produces the combination of goods and services which is most wanted by the society. What is the condition necessary in order to meet this criterion? Well, it is when firms charge a price which is equal to the marginal cost, MC. Okay, P equals to MC will be the benchmark or will be the criterion that needs to be met in order for us to say that a given firm is allocative efficient or resources are allocated efficiently in a given market.